Hello, everyone. My name is Amit, and I am a solution architect at Cognitus. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to our solution for contracts data protection with SAP's UI data protection for S/4HANA. Our world today is completely data-driven, and we can all agree that information is the most important asset for any organization. And in recognition of that fact, we are aiming to enable our customers with a solution where data protection is built in by design rather than being an afterthought. So let's get started. Let's first talk about the problems that we intend to address with this solution. We want to control user access to sensitive information in order to protect critical business operations and to prevent misuse of sensitive information by employees. We also want to keep a track of user activities in order to understand user behavior and malicious intentions. So, how do we do that? Well, here's SAP's solution for that, UI data protection and masking for S/4HANA. This solution helps customers protect sensitive or classified information by restricting access for internal employees. It's a completely new way of handling authorizations and data access in S/4HANA that goes beyond the traditional authorization object-based restrictions. Now, let's take a look at the high-level architecture to understand how UI data masking works. So if you see on the left-hand side, we have the SAP user accessing our system through the SAP UI. When a user requests for any information from the backend, you can see a request going through. However, when the backend system sends a response back to the UI, this is the point where data masking kicks in. So I would like you to focus on the highlighted section now. So just before the response reaches the UI, it is pulled up into the authorization layer that determines if it is safe to reveal this information, and it does it based on either user roles or data protection policies. So based on the result from this authorization layer, either the data will be obfuscated or it will remain unchanged. And finally, the information is passed on to the UI with sensitive data being masked. Now, there is a whole array of additional features that come along with the solution to protect sensitive data. And here's an overview of the key features. The first one is data masking. So as we have talked about it earlier, sensitive information is masked at the UI layer based on user authorization. The next is data blocking, which is another great feature, which is basically the ability to block certain data records on the UI. For instance, you may have a table with multiple records, and with data blocking, the table will only show records that the user is authorized to see. Then we have attribute-based access control, which is the core feature that differentiates the solution from traditional SAP authorizations. So what it means is that at runtime, the solution can dynamically decide whether the user is authorized to see the information or not. And this is based on the context in which the information is requested by the user. Then we have reveal on demand. So now, well, certain sensitive information can be set up to be temporarily revealed on demand, and this can be enabled with the use of a workflow approval. So uh, the supervisor may take a look at the request for reveal of sensitive information, and they can take a decision whether it should be allowed or not. Then we have application blocking, which essentially means blocking access to certain applications um based on certain criteria. For instance, an application can be blocked based on geolocation. Then we have GUI button blocking, where specific functions or buttons on SAP GUI screen can be blocked for unauthorized users. And lastly, we have sensitive field access trace. So a trace can be set up to track when a user tries to access sensitive information, and it also tells us whether the information was revealed or not. Now we are going to take a look at the contracts, data protection and CIS-AD and how information on sensitive contracts can be protected. So it's all driven by CIS-AD contract protection classification, which is a part of the current CIS-AD solution, and it essentially tells us which contracts hold sensitive information and what level of authorization is required to access the information. For instance, you can mark contract as restricted, confidential, etc. in CIS-AD. The solution allows businesses to also define data protection and masking behavior in the system, and that basically translates to uh, blocking access to protected contracts if the user does not have the authorization, masking sensitive information on contracts, then blocking access to contract applications based on user's location, requesting access to sensitive data temporarily if a user requires it for a task, and this comes along with logging of such requests along with an approval process. Simplified configuration for contract field masking based on user authorization, and simplified configuration for defining a CIS-AD contract protection classification and the corresponding SAP business roles. Now, let's look at a few examples. So here we can see how a user with no authorization is not allowed to display a protected contract, while a user with full authorization is allowed to display the document. On the next slide, we can see that a user with no authorization is only able to see non-sensitive contracts during a search in the sales contract application. Uh, while a user with partial authorization can see non-sensitive and sensitive contracts during a search in the application. Also note that sold to information is masked for this user for the second contract, as they do not have sufficient authorization to view partner information on that document. The next user with full authorization can see non-sensitive and sensitive contracts along with partner information during a search in the application. So because the user has all the required authorizations, they're able to look at all the information on these documents. Now let's take a look at how protected documents look for two users with different levels of authorizations. So on this slide, you can see that the first user has partial security authorization, while the second user has full authorization. Now in this example, some data like partner information, prime contract number, and WBS element are masked for the first user, while the second user can view all that information on the same contract. Uh, Another important thing to note is that this behavior is configurable and we can define which fields can be viewed at what level of authorization for protected documents. And here on the next slide, we can see how contract application blocking works, wherein based on user's location, um, we can restrict access to the contract applications. And here we see how a reveal request can be created to display masked information, and this triggers an approval process. This configuration setup defines which sensitive contract fields can be viewed at different CIS-AD classification levels. Now, to help you visualize what this configuration means, let's look at the next slide. So if you see here, restricted classification does not have access to partner information, prime contract number, WPS element, etc., while the top secret classification has access to all the sensitive information. So this is what the configuration essentially defines in the system. Um, what fields can be viewed at what authorization level, basically. Now, moving on to the next piece of config, here we can see the link between CIS-AD data protection classification and SAP business roles. So this essentially tells us what level of authorization a user has in the CIS-AD solution. Now let's move on to the technical overview to get a deeper understanding of these capabilities. So we have two possible ways in which authorization checks can be set up for data masking. The first is role-based checks, like traditional authorization approach. You can simply specify a business role, and if a user is assigned that role, it means they are authorized. Then we have attribute-based authorization checks. And with this option, we can define more complex conditions that are evaluated at runtime. So based on the result of data protection policies, the system will decide whether a user should be allowed to look at the information or not. And this translates to a flexible solution that can intelligently decide when to reveal the information. And this is the policy builder for defining data protection policies. Another important thing to note is that additional ABAP code can be implemented within the policy evaluation framework. Also, the solution can be used to mask UI fields by setting up technical addresses based on different SAP UI elements. So we can set up masking for UI fields for most UI technologies, including SAP GUI, Webdin Pro, UI5, and PDFs. Also, the solution comes with a UI recording tool that can be used to identify technical addresses for any UI element, which in turn uh, is something that supports easy configuration in the system. Now, like every other solution, the solution has its own limitations, and it's important that we address these limitations upfront, assess their impact on business operations, and also try to mitigate any risks. So let's look at the first one, which is masking of proposed values in drop-down lists is not supported. So um, if you expand the drop-down on SAP GUI, you can see all possible values for that field. However, if we talk about its impact, it's going to be minimal as the field value can still be masked, but and the proposed values in dropdown don't really expose any business information. The next one is the UI masking. Uh, does not work in ABAP debugger, developer transactions, and SQL command editors. So as we discussed earlier, UI masking works at the UI layer and has no impact on the application or database layer. Now, this risk can be overcome by following effective security practices, such as restricting debug access in production environment, restricting access to developer transactions and applications in the system, restricting access to business applications that are not required for a business role, and also the recommendation is not to use production data in development and quality environments. The next one is about hiding of uh, hiding of values for radio buttons and checkboxes. So this is another product limitation, but again a very low impact item as checkboxes and radio buttons don't really store sensitive information. The next is masking for ALV reports developed using integrated data access. So ALV IDA is used to develop reports on database tables that, unlike classic ALVs, don't use internal tables but directly query the database to display the output. So uh, the the current situation is that ALV with IDA is not supported for masking, and an easy way to mitigate this risk is just to not allow usage of IDA ALV, and instead such reports should be developed as Fury apps with pagination using CDS or using classic ALV reports. The next is UI fields with custom logic at the UI layer. So any UI fields that are defined and managed at the UI layer and have no connection to the backend S/4HANA system cannot be masked by the solution. For instance, let's consider the highlighted column to be a custom field defined in UI5, and let's say it uses an API call to an external service for real-time currency conversion. So in this example, the logic is implemented at the UI layer to call an external API and convert the net value from US dollars to euros. So UI masking will not work for the highlighted field because it has no link with the SAP backend. However, if we look at another example where let's say the net value field in US dollars is set up for masking in S/4HANA. So this field is a backend field which is being displayed on Fiori. So what happens here is that the UI layer cannot use this data because it's obfuscated by the backend before it enters the UI layer. So in the end, any information which is flowing from the S/4HANA backend remains hidden, but anything which is implemented at the UI layer is not supported for masking. Right. The next is UI5 charts and graphs, which are again not supported for masking. So in this example, if we look at profit center or project names, such values cannot be masked. One way to mitigate this is to restrict access to such applications to only key business users. And the final one is uh, unknown custom programs. This is a case where the protection from UI masking may be bypassed by a developer by creating a rogue program in the system and sneaking it into the production environment. However, it can again be overcome with effective security practices like vetting custom programs and applications before being moved to production environment, restricting access to business applications that are not required for a business role, restricting debug access, and restricting access to developer transactions and applications. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact the Cognitus team. Thank you so much.